First of all, when we're talking about racism, I think it's critical that we understand we're talking about a global phenomenon. When we talk about racism and what we're actually dealing with, we're dealing with a global challenge. We're talking about something that affects people everywhere in the world. When we talk about racism, there are many ways to talk about it, and quite frankly, people are at different places in terms of their understanding of racism. What we have in common is the opportunity to work together to heal and to build a better society than the one we have currently. It's important to understand that there are many levels when we talk about racism, and that we make every effort to share with people. We can hear them. We're open to hearing them, though their views may be different than our own. You know, one of the greatest challenges that we face in bridging the gap between people who deny racism exists and people who say they live it every day. The gap is that all of us, each one of us as human beings, are complicitous in the ongoing story of racism. So whether or not you see yourself as a person who is a victim or a perpetrator or have nothing at all to do with it, we have a shared responsibility to confront this ill because of the damage it is doing to our society globally. For a lot of people, the challenge of racism is so big, so daunting, that it feels overwhelming. It feels as though a solution is impossible. What I would say is that there are challenges that we face in our lives that are lifelong. And it's part of the human condition. So those aspects of our lives where we're presented with lifelong challenges, challenges that require the best of us, challenges that really make us dig deep and reflect on who we are and why we're here and what kind of human being we choose to be. Those existential questions are connected to this issue of racism. So while the issue of ending racism may seem overwhelming, if we just take a step back for a second and allow ourselves to be a bit more reflective, what I'm suggesting is that we have immense power to end racism, each of us. And it starts with us, personally. So I don't feel overwhelmed. And when we really think about what's possible, I think there's great reason for hope. You see, for me, the square root of life is relationships. And the essence of relationships is communication. So while dealing with the issue of racism seems overwhelming, all of us have access to the tools that at least kickstarts the work that's necessary to address it. And that is something as simple as a conversation, daring to enter into an honest, authentic, sincere conversation with another human being. The Truth and Reconciliation Conversations is driven by 5 commitments. Commitment number 1 is compassionate empathy. And we say, I am committed to being emotionally, mentally, and physically present to hear and help others.
Just want to get a focus.
All right, speed, so whenever you're ready.
Compassionate empathy. That's a powerful concept. Compassionate empathy has to be initiated, if we're going to make this work, by our white allies. Because everything about our experience as blacks on this planet is a negative experience. So the first step that we have to do to redress this is to be able to look at who's telling the history stories. Until the lion gets his own storytellers, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. My name is Glenn Ellis. I'm based in Philadelphia. Professionally, I'm a bioethicist. I'm also a medical journalist. I'm also a health advocate. Currently, I'm a visiting scholar at the National Bioethics Center for Research and Healthcare at Tuskegee University. I'm also in my second fellowship at Harvard Medical School in bioethics. I write a syndicated weekly column in the Black press in the United States. Ethics is what you ought to do. The law says what you have to do. So when we look at healthcare and medicine and related types of fields, we say, are we doing what we ought to do? Or are we just okay with allowing things to work like the law says they have to work? I went to college with aspirations of becoming a medical doctor. And being born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama in the 60s, it was during that journey in pursuit of medicine to become a doctor that I realized I'm really a social advocate. That's in my DNA, that's my upbringing, all the adults I grew up with, all of my personal experiences in Birmingham.
You can never whip these boys if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
You know, starting with being a toddler, trying to figure out what my aunts and mom were in the kitchen crying about, only to find out it was Emmett Till. Or in '63 on September 15th to be at church and find out that 4 of my classmates and friends were killed in a church bombing while I was at church down the street and having to go to school the next day. So the injustices inherent in those types of lived experience are the things that help me to understand equity and social justice in medicine allowed me the opportunity to make a greater contribution to society than being a medical doctor. So now I teach medical doctors and medical students and lay people to help them to understand medicine and healthcare so that they can be active participants in the process instead of either spectators or victims. It's still a small growing field because in this country, for the most part, the field of bioethics really was launched as a result of the revelations of the existence of the Public Health Service study at Tuskegee, and that was 1972. For almost 30 years after penicillin was invented, those men were denied penicillin. So with that, much of bioethics grew out of that revelation. The next step for the healthcare community in the context of many of the medical atrocities that have happened to black people in this particular country, the United States, we have to first stop and acknowledge the truth that there has not been a single incident, episode, or experience that you could point to in the over 400 years of African presence on this hemisphere that cites an example of a good experience with healthcare and medicine. Not one time. You can't say that for nobody. You can't say it at all. As evidenced by the coronavirus pandemic that has illuminated so many ethical deficiencies in the entire system, this is another iteration of bioethics evolution as a central and critical part of healthcare and medicine. We saw it all summer long with the vaccine trials. You know, we're making extra effort to get blacks in the trials. That inherently says something's wrong. We're in the middle of a pandemic that's killing everybody, even the black people themselves and the people they know. In fact, it's killing them more than it's killing everybody else. And we got to make an extra effort to get them to see the value of being a part of these trials. That means that the people who draw that conclusion are clearly not acknowledging or recognizing the history that led up to that. Health equity at this time is something that should reflect my ability to go to seek health care, or that the availability of it to be the same as anyone else who has the same recognition of citizenry in a particular society. To use the phrase health equity in the United States is in and of itself an oxymoron. We have to begin with the fact that the United States is the only country in the developed world whose healthcare system is tied to the free market. Inherent in that is injustice. Because when we stop and look at, just by definition, what capitalism is, by definition, you have to have somewhere between 15 and 30% of people who are available to be exploited. If you allow that kind of system to be a part of a humanitarian, altruistic sector in our society, that's a recipe for disaster. There's been research that shows that a black kid in Harlem has the life expectancy that is below a kid his age in Bangladesh. If Black America was a country, there are third world countries that would rate higher than us in indicators. Wait a minute, we're the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Maybe that's why we have the poorest outcomes of any developed country, because of that configuration that allows economics and medicine to commingle. The first thing we have to do to move forward and fix this, quote unquote, is to acknowledge the truth of what happened. Because if that's not universally acknowledged, how will you know that you're going to be able to prevent it from recurring as you're trying to fix things and move forward to a better, more equitable world? That doesn't mean people have to accept blame for things, but you gotta be able to validate that it happened. And until we do that, truthfully and transparently and honestly, we can't move forward and reconcile ourselves as we live amongst each other. And for our white allies, what we have to hope and pray for is the willingness to see us as equal human beings. We don't need to be looked at as black people based on our education levels, our economic status, our zip codes, or those things, because the truth is we have never had an ability to amass those things in any kind of competitive way. We've been disadvantaged. So now all we can do is ask for compassionate empathy, not sympathy. We need compassionate empathy so that we can all move forward. And until we do that, we're going to continue to keep going around and round. If we were able to all have compassionate empathy, because it's a two-way street, by the way. Black people got to have some compassionate empathy for white people. We got to feel sorry for white people for being sold the bill of goods they've been sold. That for 3 and 4, 5, 6 generations, white people have been sold a bill of goods that made them think that there's something different about them and something inferior about us. And so they have not benefited from the richness of our culture and our history. They have not benefited from the genius of some of our intellect. They have not been able to be treated by some of the best medical professionals in the world. If we don't both exhibit compassionate empathy, the only thing we'll do is the one who is exhibiting it will dictate how we'll continue to repeat the same history, because it's not a properly informed process with both consciousness.
Being present is critical. Being present means that you honor that person, that you recognize them, and you're bringing all of your energy to the occasion so that they understand why you're present, why you're here, and that you're not distracted. Second commitment is courageous listening. And we say, I am committed to being open-minded and intentional about putting others' need to be heard first.
It's kind of, I'm remembering it now with my, that anxious feeling.
What were the difficult, challenging misunderstandings that you wanted these friends to feel and understand?
I wanted them to ultimately understand that this was something that I saw coming, that I knew it would happen. I didn't think that I would be sitting and watching it outside my window. Also, this is me turning a corner on, okay, you saw that. It's not the first one you've seen. I'm done trying to convince you that this is a real thing. Because in case of George Floyd, that wasn't in some southern state in 1962. That was in 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. About as north as you can get and still be in the United States.
All right, Tanya, anytime.
Yes, all right. So my name is Tanya Cook, and I've lived in Omaha for most of my life. The United States Air Force stationed my father at Offutt Air Force Base, which at the time was Strategic Air Command, in the late 60s. So I was born on the island of Guam, and our family moved to Omaha in 1966. And we lived on the north side, that's the traditional African-American neighborhood in Omaha, and my mother started her teaching career at Omaha North High School. So grew up here. I graduated from the same school that Henry Fonda graduated from, Omaha Central High School, and went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., moved to New York from there, and started working in advertising at the very bottom at NW Air. And then from there, I really discovered that my interest was in public relations and media relations, and worked at a couple of small PR firms before a recession happened. And I came back to Omaha, I thought, for 1 year, and it has been 30 years. Certainly, beginning with my grandfather, my mother's father, he left rural Mississippi as a teenager to kind of seek his fortune in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge. But he ended up running a very successful laundry and dry cleaning business, and all of his 10 children went to university. So my grandfather said to my mother was that, get your education, that's something that someone can't take away from you. And I think that speaks to his experience as a black man coming out of the Mississippi Delta and facing what he had to face. Like, okay, here's this thing, and maybe I'll be cheated out of land, maybe I'll be cheated out of my money, maybe I won't get opportunities. But if you have that education in your brain, there's nothing that people can take back from you. I got involved in politics. My first campaign was Mayor Dinkins in New York City. I worked on that campaign, had a great experience. A lot of the people from that campaign went on first to the mayor's war chest, and then they did things like the host committee for Nelson Mandela. Came back to Nebraska, and I was recruited to work as Governor Johan's Director of Urban Affairs, which gave me a lot of policy analysis experience. About a year later, I was approached to run for the legislature, and I decided to, because at that point I had helped several men run and win or govern, and I thought, well, I must know something because they keep hiring me to do this. So I ran successfully, I guess about 13 years ago, and I won and won again in 2012. So that is what I do now. I am the policy lead for the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. It's headquartered in Washington, D.C. I wanted to focus on issues where there were disparities in income and opportunity. So I'd be proud if it helped make things more of a level playing field. But yes, there was discouragement because it hadn't been done before. There had been one African American in the body for 36 years at that point. I had somebody whose ring you're supposed to kiss, a union leader, who wouldn't offer support and said a black woman can't win that district. I didn't go in there on a conscious level to address unconscious bias. This is what I assumed going in the door. I assumed that the majority of my colleagues, particularly men from greater Nebraska, would not have had a peer working relationship with an African American, period. So I perceived that. But then when I got there and found what the barriers to in my mind, being taken seriously and my issues being a priority were, first, you're from Omaha, and this is the city, and for some reason, Omaha was a bad thing. And then I was a woman. It was built for male state senators, as a semi-retirement gig maybe, and then their wives. And then the third thing was being black. And in a way, I appreciated a farmer he didn't know any black people, he doesn't know any Jewish people. I'm appreciating him respecting me and taking what I have to say on face value over some of my more left of center colleagues who are woke and want to tell me all about my lived experience and what I should be prioritizing and what alliances I should be making. That was more off-putting to me than someone who's like, yeah, I don't know, tell me. What we have here is like a microaggression, death by 1,000 cuts. There's air, and it's white air. And we learn to breathe that air. So for 56 years, I felt as though it's my responsibility to be this ambassador of understanding, and particularly with my experience in the legislature, my experience as a policy analyst, I'm like, wait a minute. Most of the stuff that's barriers was not put in place by people that look like me. So because you put it in place, you figure it out, you undo it. And it can't be like a part-time job. It wasn't ever a part-time job for me to be the only black person in the room. I was an elected, formalized leader. So when they want a black leader for a panel or in the mind of the, let's call it the establishment, I'm like fully vetted, and I speak on behalf of all black people. Unfortunately, Omaha has a disproportionate number of black people that live in poverty or were raised with one parent. I've never lived in poverty. I was raised with two parents that happen to be married to each other. There's still this idea of a monolith. I'm happy to do my very, very best, but I think this inflection point also means that you don't just listen to Tanya, who's invested a lot in her formal education and in her spiritual education and in really a European cultural model with ballet and violin and travel. It's just as valid from a person who is coming from experience of intergenerational poverty. They've got more of a front row seat of what is not working. This being an inflection point, a true historic inflection point that has to go beyond somebody's marketing campaign and beyond adding a diversity initiative to boards and things. You know, it causes people to feel uncomfortable, or that I don't like them or love them or want to be close to them when you say, hey, don't hold your arm up next to mine when you have a suntan. Because when somebody does that, it on some level, are they saying to me that there's no difference? Because there is one. So you don't think there's a difference. So what are all these people in the street for? Or how come in a country with 13% African American population, there aren't 13% billionaires, 13% corporate board members, 13% and gender balance? How did that happen if there weren't some mechanism? Or I want you to say to me out loud that I'm stupid, I'm lazy, I don't do something, and then open that up to me. Teach me these invisible things. But the thing is, we know there are invisible things because the things that African Americans get rich at are still raw physical talent or creative talent, music, athletes, team sports, where they jump the highest, they run the fastest. As Jesse Jackson would say, the rules are published, the rules of the games are published. Then you see, or media, Oprah. I remember Black History Week in the 5th grade. I remember looking, I think, down at the history book there, and it was one paragraph on one page. Oh, and there were slaves, kind of. And then there was the Civil War, and then there was Martin Luther King, and everything was great. They don't kind of go into, first of all, the brutality of the institution, that human beings were personal property. But I think it's important for people to recognize intellectually, first learn intellectually, this thing happened, and to accept that. Because what I found when I used to black-splain things is, oh no, that's not how it is. Or they'll give you an example of their grandpa coming and working really hard and doing well. And so they need to accept these facts about the formation of this very prosperous country, and that without the indigenous people's annihilation and the free labor and free children of the enslaved African, you don't get to make the most out of this wonderfully fertile land in a really good strategic location between two oceans. This doesn't happen. So in addition to stopping with this notion of exceptionalism, that I have this because I worked really hard, really recognizing that even if it was $10,000 that you got from your grandma's estate, it's more than most Black people get. Grandma dies and they're 40 grand in the hole. So recognizing that and accepting those as facts, and then to the degree that one can make individual decisions that aren't in direct service or indirect service to propagating these ideas of superiority or superior ideas, then we'll get someplace. I think courageous listening is to keep listening beyond the point where you think you have the answer, particularly if it's an answer about the reason why that can't happen now or ever is. So that would be listening to it from their perspective, theoretically as a layperson, as a community member, as a taxpayer, resident, whatever, and listen for an opportunity maybe where it could be changed, or at least their perspective on it could be heard, in my case, in the lawmaking process somewhere along the way, or law amending process.
Our third principle is painful conversations. And for that we say, I am committed to sharing my experiences with racism, but I'm also going to be curious about the experiences of others. So I'm going to be candid about sharing my experiences, but I'm going to be very curious about how others are experiencing it or not.
Show me this is my phone. Show me. No.
You don't have to explain nothing to her.
Take the case off. That's mine. Literally, can get it back.
Are you kidding me? You feel like there's only one iPhone made in the world?
No. Okay, then show me the.
No,
show me all my...
you get a life.
Over there. What's on your background?
You better go use find my iPhone. Go do that.
Find my iPhone is on.
Can
on now,
come
right
in?
now.
No, you can't. No.
I'm the manager of the hotel.
I don't care.
He will
This
right
is my
now.
son.
Hey,
Didn't you see me just come downstairs out of the fucking elevator?
I'm trying to help.
No, but you're not helping.
I
What
am.
you've been is disrespectful.
No, I'm trying to settle the situation. I'm asking
my son
for-
has nothing to do with her.
No.
I'm trying to figure out what's
but
going
he has
on
my
in the
phone.
lobby.
Then show me the proof. No, he's not leaving. Show me the proof.
Are you
Show me
kidding
the
me?
proof.
You better get on.
I need you away.
Let's go,
I
kid.
need you away.
I'm sorry.
Better get on. We have you see two black people?
No, I'm not letting him walk away with my phone.
Better get on somewhere.
No, please get my phone back. I cannot not have my phone.
Listen, get your ass on.
I mean, I just every day play it out of what could have been, what it could have been. But I'm so thankful that it's a teachable moment now. I mean, as an artist, our job is to paint the times. You know, Nina Simone said it best. Paint what's going on. People say music is not political. If it's not political, I really don't want to hear it because it's not saying anything. Our life is political. Who we are is political. It's a statement.
In this viral video that's reignited the debate of race in America.
Video of an altercation targeting a famed jazz musician and his son now has more than 2 million views online.
With the latest on the young woman who falsely accused a teenager of stealing her cell phone and attempted to tackle him.
Everything that I've been trying to teach him and pour into him was all put in question by the way these two people approached us. You know, you lied on him, you told him he stole something, he never would. Why? Because his dad would never allow that, you know? So you made him out of somebody who he is not. And you did it in front of a bunch of people. And then after you did that, after us walking away, you attacked us.
The idea of trauma goes above any charge that could ever be had. I want my son to grow up whole.
That's right.
That's all we want.
This answer that a parent has to give their child, son, unfortunately, it might be because you're black.
I mean, I've been confused. I mean, I don't know what would have happened if my dad wasn't there, honestly.
Is this really happening right now? Let me start recording because this is ridiculous. And then, you know, she keyed in on my son and was like, him.
Award-winning trumpet player Keon Harold and his 14-year-old son had just come down from their room to have breakfast when Keon says this still unidentified woman came out of nowhere.
No, I'm not letting him walk away with my phone.
I'm a 22-year-old girl. Racism
You seem to have attacked this little boy, this young boy, this teenager. You seem to have attacked this teenager about the phone, and then it turned out he didn't even have your phone. That's the thing. I mean, you're saying, look, I'm 22 years old. You're 22 years old, but you are old enough to know better. So I will say you're 22. I get it.
Enough.
I mean, right now, as a black man, I hate that it's a reality, but anytime I come into any kind of presence of any kind of discourse, whether that being stopped by the police or any scenario that could go another way, unfortunately, this is the way it happens. So I'm like, you know what, let me just start recording because you just never know. And we know from the idea of Emmett Till, we know from the idea of Ahmaud Arbery, we know from George Floyd, and the list goes on to things going terribly wrong when they shouldn't, when it should be a conversation, when it should be a dialogue, when then people should have a higher sense of humanity, a higher respect for humanity. But, you know, the idea of certain entitlement says, I can do what I want to your body. I can destroy your body. I can lock your body up. I can defame you. I can do whatever I want to do. And that happens so often. It's happening right now. And this is the thing that myself and my son's mother have committed to, bringing light to this issue, because sometimes people don't really understand these microaggressions, these micro nuanced things that lead to people getting locked up forever, lead to people getting fired, they lead to people getting killed. Unfortunately, black people are very often guilty until proven innocent. When we got off that elevator, my son was guilty, whether he liked it or not. He didn't even know what was going on. I had to let him know, son, these people are trying to take your dignity. These people are trying to take everything it is that I've been trying to put into you to make you a whole man. You're trying to understand the world, and I've tried to keep you away from so much stuff. I grew up in Ferguson. I grew up in a scenario where it was often that you'll see, you know, any kid, black kid under the age of 17, 16, if you driving, you're gonna be pulled over on the side of the street and it's gonna look like a Cops episode. This is every day. I've told this story before where until I moved to New York City, did I know that police shouldn't just stop you just for the hell of it. I didn't even realize that until I moved to New York City to go to the New School of Jazz. So for me, I'm hypersensitive to the idea of people looking at you, people judging you just because of your color. I didn't expect my son to have to deal with that, not in a nice hotel, not in the Arlo Hotel. We come downstairs and our whole life is shifted because somebody says you did that. And the question that I have is, over and over again, why is it so hard to believe me? Why is it so hard to believe my son? Why is it that a person who has no basis is allowed to have so much power? A person who's not a patron has power over potentially the rest of our lives just because she said, hey, that person stole my phone. What if there was a cop there? If there was a cop there, what if I wasn't on the elevator with my son? You know, what if the phone was never found? You know, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. What if I couldn't control myself? You know, I realize I've been working hard for a very long time. I have a lot to lose. Whether I like it or not, people are watching me. You are a walking book. You're a walking Bible is what my dad tells me. You are the manifestation of your actions, and how you act is how people are going to perceive you. In this scenario, we had never met this person before. But that person looked at us like we were nothing. That person felt she can project her fears on us and get away with it. Project her fears on us and delegate the manager of this establishment to actually do her dirty work. That sounds very much like the idea of policing. You know, as a black man, my life is overcoming a rebellion every day that I'm here, that I'm able to speak. And I don't take that lightly. George Floyd is not here to talk. You know, Ahmaud Arbery is not here. They're not really here to talk. And it's a tragedy. My situation with my son is very tragic, but it's also a silver lining that says, listen, we can bring each other together. We can learn from this. Many people don't even understand the idea of racism. People don't understand the idea of their bias and their prejudices about certain people. People who don't look like them. They don't really understand A plus B equals C. As I look back now, my family was a pillar to black people growing up in St. Louis. My grandfather did the drum and bugle corps, and thousands upon thousands of people were impacted. I didn't realize the importance of him doing this for years, for 40 years he did this, you know, for kids who had no outlet, kids who didn't have any musical training, kids who didn't have any discipline, kids who didn't have the money to learn a proper skill. He was giving it to them for free. We didn't realize that when he was doing it, he was actually saving many kids' lives. Fortunately, you can't save everybody, but you can give them an option. And my grandfather did that. My dad is a pastor, and he ran the Boy Scout troop, you know? So I remember, you know, on Saturdays doing scouting for food, you know, picking up canned goods, doing the canned good drives, building projects for different people. And I didn't realize how important that was in learning a deeper humanity. It's not always about you, it's about what can you give? What can you do to build this community? What can you do to help somebody else that can't do for themselves? And he would keep saying, you know what? St. Louis is all right, but it's a cow pasture. You gotta keep going. You gotta set your sights high. Keep pushing, you know? So that was the preparation for life for us. And my mom as well, my angel, taught us faith that, you know what? You may not have it all, but guess what? You just keep believing and you put in that work, you can do anything you put your mind to. Many of my cousins, many of my friends didn't make it. They ended up, again, getting locked up, getting caught up, getting blamed wrongfully, or maybe they did something. But the idea is they didn't have that opportunity they didn't have a clear road or a clear path to look at. And I'm blessed and I don't take it for granted at all. So I try to be that same kind of force for my son. I guarantee if the shoe were on the other foot, a black person wouldn't have been able to speak because they'd be in jail, you know? And these are the realities that many people will try to downplay, but when they know it in their heart that it's two systems of justice that need to be reconciled. White allies, call it out because we need you to help call this out because I can't do it myself. Why? Because the system is so inbred into every part of our lives that it's so easy to brush it under the rug. The only reason why this Arlo scenario had any light is because I posted it, not because I didn't show the managers this video, because I did. Not because I didn't show law enforcement this video, because I did.
In New York City and just go get brunch without being attacked and wrongfully accused of something.
I went through something and the platform to speak was presented. And with all my heart, I'll continue to do that. I'll continue to speak because I feel it's the right thing to do. It's the human thing to do. It's the thing that maybe somebody could be changed. Maybe somebody's heart, maybe somebody's perspective can be shifted. Maybe they can be open to learn. And that is my hopes in everything that I do as a person, as a father, as a human, as a black man. I think that's the way we make this country great. That's how we make America great, by aspiring to a higher humanity.
The fourth principle is social reckoning. And for that we say, I am committed to understanding systemic racism, and I will work toward building the equity and equality to redress this historic injustice. So I'm not going to just understand historic racism, I'm actually making a commitment to working towards building equity and equality for redress. Because absent redressing it in a social context, then it's really impossible to have a healthy kind of reconciliation.
All right, speed, so whenever you're ready.
I really do think that we're on the precipice of actually being able to become everything that we say that this place is. My name is Oren Brian Lomena, OrenBrianLomena. The Whole Hard Truth is the podcast that I started October of last year. It was something that I figured I could find my medium, a place where I was happy to talk about things that interested me, and also, I think, indulge my talk radio side in terms of getting people involved in these conversations and not having it be about, the Nuggets or the Lakers and the Broncos. And, its inception was really to, I guess, sort of have a cathartic moment with myself because of what the decade of me leaving sports, television, and radio, going into film, what that encompassed in my personal life, which was a divorce, sparked by infidelity on my own part, and then a separation from my children. My two youngest girls, my oldest lives here with me. That distance and that space is something I contended with over the course of the decade that we were kind of estranged. And The Whole Hard Truth became a platform for me to first tell that story in order, I guess, to set the tone for the type of conversations that I wanted to have. Because people talk a lot, all these different podcasts and mediums, everything's being tossed around: politics, religion, social change. And I'm a huge believer that we can't fix our communities without fixing ourselves first. So I wanted to create a platform where people understood, well, if the host is going to be this, divulgent of what's going on in his life, then this should be a platform where no bullshit kind of makes it pass. You know what I mean? So The Whole Hard Truth was completely fashioned for that. And, sometimes truth, not hard, like tough to deal with, but more like concrete. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be ugly sometimes. You know what I mean? And is that okay? Can we have that space as well? Because I think we're in a space where everybody wants to talk. I don't know how willing people are to talk about the real hard truths or the concrete truths that make up our society. I think I have always felt this silent pressure because of my background as an MC and, sort of semi-public figure, to say things that were palatable, to say things that were acceptable. And the most satisfying part has been my partnership with the DMVR. They've allowed me to say what I want, which, surprisingly enough, for somebody who's pretty outspoken, I don't always do. You always check yourself a little bit. You know what I mean? We live in a like-based world. You know what I mean? And everybody wants to be, accepted for what it is that they think and say. And the response has been great to sometimes some distasteful things. So that's been tight. Even the first 3 episodes are about my infidelity and how I broke my family up. You know what I mean? And I think that there's this expectation that the people that we see, on TV, so to speak, have these lives that are without blemish. And then when the blemish shows up, then they fall from grace and, cancel culture and all these things that have kind of taken over. And those things are truths, and it's like, I think that we've gotten off course to where we all want the best society possible. But what does that look like? And I think sometimes people think that that's a world without ugliness or a world without, distasteful things, and it's not. It's more about how do you fold those things into society and make these people feel not shunned, but, and you don't have to accept what it is that, the places they're coming from. They have to be heard. That's inclusivity to me, which is every opinion voiced and then counseled, because that creates space for dialogue, as opposed to this, we're all on the same page, we all march in the same direction, this is what we consider to be socially acceptable, let's all go that direction. And it sort of creates fear for people that I think to speak their true mind, which doesn't help at all. Two sisters who are powerhouses, like I look at my sisters and they're my idols. We all come out of the same circumstances in that, they were teens in college and I was a 13-year-old boy when our mom passed. And then we were thrown out into the world, and all three had to sort of navigate that world without, because our father wasn't there. So there wasn't ever a replacement of that sort of, that home. And so watching them go through that and then where they carry their lives to has affected me profoundly. I mean, I'm hopeful that all of this tumult that we went through in 2020, over the course of the Trump administration, the door that he opened up for dialogue, and how do we fold these views into our society? Because I think brushing them under the rug doesn't work, right? Those become your sleeper cells and people who you'll have to deal with eventually. If they're not going to be able to do it in the open, they're going to conspire in the dark. We want those voices in the conversation. And his sort of level of irreverence, first for the office of the presidency, I think for decorum in general, his poking at the media, oddly enough, it just feels to me like we have an opportunity, if we embrace it, to actually start instituting some real change. Because for far too long, I feel like we've made these sacred areas, don't come over here. Okay, I can see that to an extent. I really do think that we're on the precipice of actually being able to become everything that we say that this place is. But we gotta handle that carefully, because I think if things fall too far to the other side, political correctness is necessary, I think, in chambers of Congress and in courtrooms. And other than that, I think we have to graduate to a place where, as human beings, we can converse with somebody who has completely different views than us and still be able to find value in that conversation, even if it ends in agree to disagree. It can be, I think, to our great betterment to not let the pendulum swing too far in the other direction, where we just completely shut off things that are distasteful to us because we want to live in a nice world. I want to live in a real world. And so, George Floyd's happens, and it's obviously, I'm at Arbery 3 months prior to that. Breonna Taylor sandwiched in between the two times. Elijah McClain. The thread that I saw more than anything, and that I see, thank God it was able to culminate in the George Floyd moment and really bring some awareness to what it is that my community has dealt with when it comes to our interactions with the proper authorities. But there was a bigger conversation there, I thought, that needed to be had. And ironically enough, the opportunity was presented to us here in Denver to have that. Listen, I started a petition, it's called the Gregory Act. And there's a point in time when he's talking about how you rein in overzealous cops. And his thought was, get them licensed and insured. Because like anyone, you want to feed your family. And so if your interactions with the people that you're policing are not of the highest caliber, that dings your record, you lose your license to be a police officer, you can't feed your kids. And my message during the George Floyd time was, sign this petition, not because, let's say you don't care about me. We should all be concerned, though, that the police have this impugned ability to brutalize whomever that they want with no repercussions. You know what I mean? That's not good for me, that's not good for you, that's not good for anybody. Some 2,000 odd kids had a barbecue in celebration of Juneteenth, but it was really a time for them to, they didn't get a chance to end their school year. Had a barbecue at a park out in Aurora, and a young black man was shot and killed by another young black man. So I'm looking at that, and I'm like, this is the problem that we're having with Black Lives Matter, for instance. Of course they do. My sentiment from the beginning, from Ahmaud Arbery, was, I appreciate the sentiment, I don't need to be told my life matters. I know my life matters. I'm not upset with anyone that offers that up, but I think we're past that point of pointing out the obvious. And in that sense, all lives do matter, okay? And so But it's interesting because with Black Lives Matter, what we don't see, and what I've seen far too often, it's the only reason I harken back to my comeuppance here in Denver. Gang violence is woven into our very small community of black population here in Denver. When a cop kills a black man, we're there. Black Lives Matter. A young black man kills a black man, it's funerals and, epitaphs and, fond memories and GoFundMe pages to support the family. But no conversation about Black Lives Matter and Black lives. It's hard for my brain to compute that conversation. Black Lives Matter. Of course they do. Do they matter to us is the question. The thing about America that is curious is that you hear often, this is not who we are. Yes, it is. This is who we are. This is how we started. Ask a Native American how they feel about what America is. Race in America, how we deal with one another in America is all steeped in these, red, white, and blue colloquialisms and what we could be, our better angels. That's awesome. What are we though? Because if we don't deal with that, then all those things are just hopes and dreams that may or may hit, and and so reconciliation race-wise, will the George Floyd moment fix it? Something that's steeped in 400 years? Probably not. How do we change our communities? How do we build up our society? Well, you do that with people who are like-minded and in the same situation that you're in. And if we realize what our commonalities are, I think that this race conversation and reconciliation things become, because I can't coach someone out of thinking that black people are worse than them. What I can do is show you in my lifestyle who I am, and the more that we're able to see each other like that, start to realize, yeah, I'm a lot more in common with that guy than I thought. I just think that the conversation is so binary that we lose sight of what the point of racial reconciliation really is, which is to come together as under the flag that we've all been placed under, and understand that now American is a race, to me, because we're all here. We're all, and not in some kumbaya sort of all lives matter thing. I'm saying in general, we are what we've been. America is a racist nation. Does that mean that it's relegated to a spot, where we can never ever see our better life? No. But when we own that, this is who we are. This is who we've been. That is okay because this is where we are now. And how best do we marshal ourselves forward and comport ourselves in society and carry ourselves next to one another to make sure that our communities come up? Because you're going to see, I think, our commonalities, hopefully, inside of all of that racial tension.
And thus, our fifth point is spiritual reconciliation. Because we go from a social reckoning to spiritual reconciliation, and that, we say, is I am committed to understanding others, their life circumstances, and discovering ways to heal and build better communities together.
I'm Sean Moore. I am the associate pastor here at Living Spirit Church. My main focus as the associate pastor is to kind of usher in a new beginning as it relates to racial reconciliation here in the neighborhood. And then after June, the senior pastor will be retiring, and then I will step in and follow through with those initiatives that I started as the associate into being the senior pastor here. After high school, I joined the military. So I was in the military, I was in the Navy for 4 years. And when you're in the military, whatever skills they give you, when you get out, you do those skills. So I was a security specialist. So I got out, I started doing security work. And from there, I met a police officer that's like, you're really wasting your time with security work. You should become a police officer. So he convinced me to become a police officer. I did that for a while, and I was good at it, right? I really enjoyed it. But there was something lacking. I needed something more. So I decided to go back to school, and I was at seminary, of all places, and I was invited to go to South Africa on this delegation. And it's there that all these different worlds came colliding in. Because I was able to see reconciliation from the standpoint of this South African ethos. And I spent time there, and I remember flying back. So this is afterwards, and I fell asleep And this voice woke me up saying, I want you to do reconciliation back in the States. Then I was in South Africa to learn about what other countries would my skills be used in. And I was told, no, you got to go back home. So I got home, and since 2007, I've been engaged in reconciliation to a point to where, I mean, my studies have focused in on it. My doctoral dissertation is about it. And I'm creating a center for racial reconciliation currently now. So if someone said, what was the trigger that got you to where you are now, to have to say that flight coming home, falling asleep, and hearing this voice clear, say, I want you to do what you've learned here back in the States. My cup was on E. Like, okay, I mean, of all the injustice that I've seen, of all the hardships, I mean, it's hard work, you know, being an American, period, and then being an African American, in my opinion. It's hard work to consistently be at the grind, but then also to be someone who's about justice. Like, I need to be about justice. And so my cup was empty. And I went to South Africa where my cup got filled up. And I was thinking, okay, where am I gonna go now? South America, back to Asia, you know, wherever it is, I'm gonna get to the States, I'm going to graduate, then I'm gonna leave and do the rest of my life somewhere else. It was literally, I had enough, like, I'm leaving. And this voice had said, you're not done there. I need you to go back and do the work that you need to do there in your own neighborhood. I think one of the key factors, it's either this warriorship, like there's something that I have to fight or to engage in, because I can't let it stick to me, or there's nothing to fight for, or I'm gonna be overpowered. And I think the idea of not being a victim or a warrior, but being a reconciler, right? Being a reconciler is the key that keeps people energized, because it includes both the oppressor and the oppressed, right? So we need both of us to be on the same page, because if not, then we're gonna swap power, right? You got power and then I got power, we're gonna switch back and forth, so on and so on. But I think that for me, the key is, how do I truly be a reconciler? And then how do I look to someone and to say, I love you and I wanna serve and I wanna be in the same place with you? Because it wasn't until South Africa that I had seen people that had really good reasons not to want to be with each other. Like, literally, the idea of, I see you, I want to be in one accord with you, let's work this out, right? I literally saw the gospel played out in South Africa in real time, which I thought, that gives me hope. And I was like, I want to be part of that. And so, I mean, I'm just driven by the idea of wanting to be a part of this tide of reconcilers that literally, again, for me, the word is, it's apokatalea, which means removing a barrier that hinders authentic relationships. And so for me, that's about reconciliation. How can I remove these barriers between me and other folks? And so I think for me, it's this idea that there needs to be a story, right? So we need to have stories, we need to have lament, we need to have accountability, we need to have justice, and we also need to have new covenants that once this has been said, I'm gonna commit to not doing this anymore. And so I think reconciliation without justice has been the type of reconciliation that's been presented to folks in the urban context, like, you know what, hey, I'm sorry, let's just have a handshake and get over it. Well, hang on for a second. If you're actually going to be reconciled with me, well, there are all these barriers that need to be removed, because again, the idea of you being able to wash yourself clean of what's taking place and I'm still in the same spot isn't a form of reconciliation. So my first step is, let's share your story. And then the other part of that is, those that listen to the story need to believe it. Things are that bad, right? They have been that bad. And I think if you never experienced it, it's hard to fathom that a system could be created that literally rejects a group of people when it doesn't reject you. It's like, well, we can all get along and we can all pull ourselves by our bootstraps. Like, well, no, we all can't, because there's a system that's geared for us not to do so. Always about having an open dialogue The thing that I want to have happen that has yet to take place, it's my hope that we can start having community dialogue with local law enforcement and community members to have those real raw conversations to where it isn't a training for a community event or a training for a local law enforcement, but how do we actually come together? And again, there needs to be some sort of open dialogue. And then again, in the end, there's got to be accountability, and there needs to be a new covenant saying that we won't allow this to take place anymore. I think there needs to be a process that the city engages in. And so right now, the city has created a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that I'm sitting on with a few other leaders. But the question is, what process needs to take place? And of course, I have a process that I think could be implemented, but I think at the same time, we're trying to figure out what this looks like. But I do think that without seeing the other, right? And so I need to Salbona, word I picked up inside. I need to Salbona, right? I need to see you mentally, physically, spiritually, in Ubuntu, right? I am because we are, right? And then we move into co-creation where it's a give and a take. Then we have covenant writing to where we write a new covenant because we're not going to go back that way. But then the most important part is the fourth part, which is actually doing the work, right? So once you actually do the work, you can go back to step one and say, what kind of a community are we now? We said we weren't going to do these things in our co-creation process. Are we still doing them? If not, you can then literally measure. You can begin to measure the reconciliation process by the things in which you said, the new people with our new covenant are going to behave in a new way. We should have a new product. And if it's not new, then we're like, somehow we missed the boat. As I'm sitting on the board, I'm beginning to believe that there is some traction taking place to where folks do want to see some movement taking place. So as a faith spiritual leader, I believe that in the end, there will be justice. There will be peace. There will be harmony. There will be reconciliation. Because if not, I'm in the wrong type of business. Right? I'm in the wrong business if I can't believe it's the darkest before the sunlight cracks in. I actually do believe that like King said, love will eventually win. I believe that.
There are people everywhere doing the work every day with joy, with a commitment to face down the challenges of those who say it's impossible and do it anyway. This work is recognizing that the immense power we have is not because we've been empowered, it's already there. The existential question is, how are we going to use it? And I'm convinced that whatever we turn our attention to, we then direct our energy toward. And if we are present with this issue, if we bring ourselves to the occasion, there's a lot more we could do than what's been done.
matters that concern us all, there is no such thing as an irrelevant point of view. Every person has a say. No voice is too small. Sometimes the youngest and weakest in society have the most important message. Of course, some voices echo throughout history, and their voices become our voice. Hello, my name is Margot DeCook, and I am the Assistant Director of Academic Partnerships and Pathways here at Citizens High School. In 2021, we started the Truth and Reconciliation Conversation in association with the Nelson Mandela Academy. It's all about raising our voices, your voice, in support of racial equality and social justice. We believe student voices matter, that the passions, ideas, and energy of young people truly can change the world. And the Truth and Reconciliation Conversation course is designed to equip students with the skills necessary to become forces of positive change on a local, state, national, and even global level, while earning high school credit or continuing education certification. The course will teach students how to engage in meaningful discussions about race and justice while using blogs, or vlogging, or posting content on TikTok. We take a nonpartisan approach that focuses on getting the message out, engaging friends, family, and community in the conversation, and effecting positive change. Our goal is to inspire students to stay involved. By participating in the series, students will learn about the various options available to get involved in the civics arena, interact with other like-minded young leaders, become empowered and inspired to become agents of change in their own communities, have the opportunity to ask questions and interact with all guests, and learn more about course offerings that are available to them. One voice can make a difference, because one voice often leads to a chorus of voices. To learn more about the Truth and Reconciliation Conversation course, go to citizenshighschool.com.